Well, I never dreamed I'd get in the hardwood flooring business. I'm a white-collar dropout, an old-growth hippie of sorts, but I always did enjoy working with wood. I used to build furniture when I was a kid. Wood flooring systems are totally different than anything else in construction. They're a finished carpentry and rough carpentry all roll into one. It takes certain types of techniques to make that happen and function well over a long period of time. And probably most of all, your floor or floors that you do for yourself are going to be walked on by you and your friends and your family for probably many lifetimes. I've designed this tape for the first-time user. It should give you basic ideas on what's involved, what you need, and whether or not you can do it. I really think you can. Hi, I'm Don Bollinger. I own and operate a hardwood flooring business in Seattle, Washington, the oak floors of Green Bank. I've been in the business about 15 years now, and I hope to share a little of what I've learned with you on this tape. Now, if you've seen my strip installation tape, you're probably already familiar with this space. This is our living room. It's about a 15 by 17 space and the largest room that we'll be doing today. You might notice along the hearth here we've got some brass and ebony inlays. Really nice. Now, the flooring rolls right into the dining room here, and it's about an 8 by 10 space. The floor we've installed here is #1 common red oak. We're really looking forward to a nice hardwood floor in the kitchen. Makes it easy to clean surface. And it continues on down the hallway where it meets up with some existing flooring in 3 bedrooms and our bathroom. Stretched out in front of me here are some of the more popular machines that we've used in the hardwood flooring business over the years. Here we have professional machines, and over here we have some of the more common do-it-yourself machines. I'll go into the use of these machines a little bit later in more detail. Now, we're sanding and finishing a new floor here. But even if you were sanding and refinishing the existing floor, the basic principles are the same. Any little differences I'll show you as we go along. But before you start running one of these machines on the floor, make absolutely certain you've got all protruding objects sunk down below the floor surface. Nails, staples, that sort of thing. Because if you don't and you hit these with one of these machines, you're going to wish you hadn't. Oh, I'm over here in the corner of the living room now, and I found a couple of nails that I better set before I start sanding. Nails like these are particularly dangerous. They can actually tear the paper or the drum itself. So you want to make sure they're sunk well below the flooring surface. Probably a good 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch below the surface. Okay, as you can probably tell, we don't have any base molding in here. Now, we've had to remove the existing base molding to install our new wood floor. Now, if you're just sanding and finishing, you really don't have to remove your old base and reset it. If you want to, it's fine, but it's going to be a lot of extra work and you might end up trashing your base in the process. And you can get just about as close with the new sanding equipment that's available today. Now, over here, near the sliding glass door, I have some plugs that are covering up screws that I put down these boards with here. And I'll need to take these down flush before I can run the big machine over them. Now, I'll use the edger for that. But that's going to create a lot of dust, so I want to make sure all the areas that are not being sanded are well masked off before I start. Okay, I'm putting up a sheet back here in the master bedroom, and it's really important to put up something to protect against dust, because if you don't, you're really going to have a mess later on. Sheets really are much better than anything else because they really block the dust and you don't end up having things coming around them because you're going to be going back and forth through the doorway there. Now, I'll show you what I do here where we leave a door in place. One of the things I like to do is to take a towel like this, an old rolled up towel, put masking tape on it, and tape it to the door like this. Because there's always a space that's underneath the door, and when you pull the door closed behind you, it closes that space in. Now that we've got the house masked off, we can start sanding here with the edger to take these plugs down. This is called an edger because it's used primarily around the edges of the room where the big machine can't operate. The edger relaxes on these wheels back here, and most of the work is done right around here. This machine torques at about 7,000 RPMs and really takes off more flooring than any other machine that I know of its size. And this leading edge gets right next to the wall and the base, so that's really why you don't have to worry about removing the base if you don't want to. One of the major hassles in sanding floor using any kind of machine is keeping the cord out of the way. You'll find that with both the edger and the big machine. If you don't have anything on your rental machine that you use, what you might want to do is take a coat hanger and bend it to fit so that you can just hang it on your belt loop or something of that nature. Nice. Well, we can't put it off any longer. It's time to rough sand the floor. I've laid out an assortment here of drum sanders, or as they're sometimes called in the trade, the big machine. These two machines are quite commonly available in rental yards, and they're tilt-type machines, while these two over here are lever-action machines and are typically professional models but are becoming increasingly available. About 80% of your floor sanding will be done with one of these machines. Now, you won't need a whole assortment of machines to do your floors. You'll only need one, and we're going to show you two different types of machines, one of the tilt machines and one of the lever action machines, just to give you an idea of what it's like depending on what's available to you. I'd like to load paper on each one of these machines so you can see how they're done. And I'll start here with the DU8. The DU8 has a bar here that holds the paper in tight. You notice there's 3 notches in the end of each side of the paper to slip underneath the screws. It's a bit difficult to load, and it's probably more time consuming to load than any of the other machines. Once you get the paper in there, you want to hold the paper tight while you're screwing it into place. It's important that you get this screwed down as tight as possible, that the paper is in tight and this bar is tucked down into the drum as tightly as it will go. Okay. We're ready to start sanding with it if we wanted to use it. Now, I'm not going to start with this machine. I think what I'll do is I'll do a little rough sanding with this next machine here and show you what it's like. The Silverline has a slot in the drum here where both ends of the paper tuck, and they're held tight here by twisting these little bolts at the end of the drum, and the cams tighten down and hold the paper in there. I like that because the bar doesn't come into contact with the floor like it does in the DU8. The other thing I like about this machine is that it sets in a resting position with the drum up off the floor, so it can actually be operating with the drum spinning and not in contact with the floor. You'll see how important that is later when we start using this machine. Here's how I load it. It has a nice little notch up here so that you can put creases in your paper just the right size to load it. You stick this end in first, try to hold it as tight as you can, twist the drum around, and then while you're holding the other side tight, slip the notch in there. Okay, it's really important that this paper is in there tight. And this machine you tighten one side at a time. I've tightened the left side now, and I'll pull the right side tight in the direction of the arrow you see here. If you don't get this paper tight, it'll go flying right off there. That's great. Okay, now this next machine is a 12-inch drum sander. You notice the drum on it is 12 inches wide as opposed to 8 inches wide on the first two we just showed you. It loads much the same way as the Silverline, except with its 2 little nuts here on the side, you operate those in opposite directions at the same time. You might notice the paper shim in here. As these machines age, the cams inside the slot here tend to wear down, and a scrap piece of paper or shim is necessary in between these sheets, the ends of the sheets, to hold the paper in tight as you're tightening it down. Now, in contrast to the Silverline and the DU8, where you tilt the machines back and forth to move the drum up off the ground, this machine operates on a lever action. This lever actually lets the drum drop to the floor. It's also a much heavier machine than these other two. It's a 5 horsepower machine, and it really takes a lot more material off the floor than those other two. That has advantages and disadvantages. It's an advantage if you know what you're doing. It's a disadvantage if you don't know what you're doing, because you can take an awful lot off in the wrong way very quickly with this machine. The next machine I'd like to show you, and the last one, is a fairly new type of machine for floor sanding, in our country at least. It operates by the use of a full belt as opposed to a sheet. And the belt is loosened up by this lever. You pull the lever up like this, and the belt really just slides off. It even has little arrows on the inside to point to which direction, the rotation of the drum of the machine. Position it on there and drop the handle, and you're ready to go. A couple of the advantages of this machine are the continuous belt. Because you don't have the notches in the drum, it doesn't tend to leave as many chatter marks on the floor, and I'll show you what those look like a little later. The machine is a little more compact, and because of that you can get into tighter spaces, which means less edger work. And it's also a lever operated machine, so that it raises and lowers by operation here from the handle rather than having to be tilted. Now before we start making dust, I'd like to show you how we're going to attack this floor. This is the floor plan of our house here, and these lighter areas show you the areas that we've installed new flooring and where we're going to be sanding and finishing. Since our flooring is running in this direction, we'll be operating the big machine in this direction as well. Now we need 6 feet to operate that big machine, so we can't sand the entire room running back and forth. We have to turn around and change directions and sand this direction as well. So we need a transition line. And you want to have this transition line in a non-focal area. So you don't want it down the hallway or in front of your hearth or in front of like the sliding glass door here out onto the deck. So we've positioned our transition line right here, kind of out of line of sight. So what we'll do is we'll start on this right-hand wall. We'll make our first pass down to the wall and then back and go past this line. And then we'll continue on making passes across the room, all the way across like this until we get to the other side of the room. Then we'll turn around and start doing this side. And again, we'll go past this transition line each time we make a pass until we've continued all the way on this other side of the room. We're ready to start sanding here. I'll demonstrate this little Silverline floor sander here first. You might recall this is one of those that the drum tilts into the floor like this. Pushing down on the handles raises it up. Letting up on the handles lowers the drum into the floor again. Okay, now, unless you're used to operating this big machine or the edger, you might want to start in another area of the house that's less visible, even though we've started in the living room here. Because these machines can really do a lot of damage, and it's really a nice idea to get used to how they feel and get comfortable with them before you start in a real visible part of the room. What I want to do here is to get this machine in as close as I can to the wall with this first pass. That reduces the amount of edger work I have to do. Move forward slowly and gradually lower the drum into the floor. Notice I'm taking deliberate small steps. Normal steps will cause the machine to move back and forth. Keep your eyes alert and be ready to lift the machine or the drum off the floor before you get to the upcoming wall. Then start backwards and gradually lower the drum back into the floor, going back in the same path you took forward. This first sanding with 36 grit takes off about 80% of the total material I'll be taking off the floor. Most floors take about 3 papers. Some may require as many as 4 if the floor is painted or it's got a lot of wax buildup or old finish debris. Now as you can see, I've moved over several rows already. Each pass forward and back you want to move over 1 to 2 boards. Any closer than that and you're liable to leave ridges in the floor. Your prime objective here with this rough sanding is to get the floor flat, and in the case of refinishing, you also want to remove all the old finish. Now, with professional machines, you probably can achieve that with 1 pass across the floor. But with a lighter weight machine, or if your floor is really in rough shape, you may have to make 2 or 3 passes across the floor with the same grit paper. And that's okay. Just don't get too close with your rows. Keep them apart. Well, one of the nice things about these small machines is you can get in close, even one-handed, to get into tight spots like underneath this counter. Notice my cabinets have all been taped shut to keep the dust out. We'll take a little break in the action here to show you some of the things that can go wrong when you're using one of these machines. I've built a mock-up here out of some scrap pieces of flooring to show you because I don't want to put those marks in my floor. But you're likely to have some of these marks happen, and I'll show you how to correct them. One of the real common mistakes is to start the machine with the drum in contact with the floor. Fortunately, with this machine, you get very little forward movement. Some of the machines, however, will take off and shoot off across the floor, but you will end up with a mark in the floor that's visible if you don't take care of it. Another common mistake is what we call a drum mark or stop mark. And that's caused by stopping the machine with the drum in contact with the floor. Never stop the machine with the drum in contact with the floor. If you do, you'll leave a real nasty mark that's the devil to take out. I'm going to put one in the floor and I'll show you what it looks like and how to take it out. Well, I've brought the light down in here close so you can see this a little bit better, but as you can see, that is one nasty drum mark. That didn't even show up in more with the stain and finish on it. And the way you take it out is with the same machine you put it in there with, or that's the best way, going back and forth like this over it, feathering it out wider each time. If that doesn't work, we'll have to 45 it across it to get it flat. If you think you may have left a drum mark, you can take it out by sanding back and forth across it like this. Each time you make a pass, expand out to the left and right 1 or 2 boards to feather out the hole you're making in the floor. It's okay to 45 it, but be sure to pull the board straight, sanding with the grain before you move on. Ooh, that's good. Surprised I got it out. And while I'm at it, I'm going to show you a few things that can go wrong when you're using an edger. Well, now as you can see, I've got some pretty nasty cross-grain scratches. You want to try to make the edger feather out into the grain as you do it. And you never want to dip into the edger like I did here. When you lean forward on the machine, put pressure on the machine, you'll dig in and you'll leave these edger dishes in there that really show up when you get finish on it. When you're working in tight areas like a kitchen, it really is important that you keep that bag out of the way. If you don't, you're going to bung up the cabinets. You want to know where that machine is at all times. Also, you have to feather in and feather out of the floor a lot more quickly than you do in the main part of the floor. Another nice thing about these small machines is you can use that one-headed action up against the wall a lot easier to feather out of the floor. That way you don't have to edge the middle of the floor. That's what causes a drum mark. You can see I have these cabinets taped too, so I don't have to wash every dish in the house. Now before I turn the machine around and go back to the other side, I like to turn it off because when you move the cord and the machine's running and you hit that drum, you can really do some damage. Somebody who has rented this machine has hit the cord and you can see what it did to it. Now that we've got this side of the room sanded over here, we'll turn around and we'll sand this side of the room. Now we'll use our transition line that we spoke about earlier as our starting point, and we'll finish up past that so that we feather out. When we come back, we will feather the machine back past that transition point. In the heat of battle, you might lose your place. Some people find it helpful to draw a line with a piece of chalk to remind them where their transition line is. Now during this stage, you want to make sure you get the floor totally flat. That is, you want to make sure all the boards are the same height. If you're refinishing a floor, you want to make sure you get all the old finish, all the old wax and stain and so forth removed before you go on. Don't depend on the medium and fine papers to accomplish this. I've rough sanded all the areas that I can with the big machine, so now I have to switch to the edger to rough sand those areas like in here and all around the perimeter of the rooms that I can't reach with that other machine. I want to tell you a little bit about this machine, how it operates. These wheels are adjustable here on the top, and that raises and lowers them. What that does is it tilts or raises and lowers the sanding plate or the spinner plate of the edger. When you're rough sanding, you want this section here and only this section to come in contact with the floor. You'll take off more material that way. As we get into finer and finer papers, we can add 3, 4, 5 papers. We've got 2 on there now, but as we get to finer papers, we can add more papers. This will flatten this out. And when it flattens this out, you'll get a smoother streak across the floor, and by that you'll be able to take out these marks that the rough paper puts in there. There are two basic moves you make with the edger. Both of them encourage the use of its feathering technique, and that is always running the machine up and to the right. With this first technique, I'm using a horseshoe type motion. As you notice, I'm moving up and to the right. You always want to check frequently to make sure the floor is good and flat before you move on. The other technique is where you move straight left and right. Notice that with each move, I'm coming back and going over the area where I just sanded. What it's doing is it's taking out the marks that I've left behind. The edger will leave a mark no matter what you do on the floor, and each mark should take out the previous mark. You might remember earlier the kind of damage that the edger could do. A lot of that is caused by pushing down on the front of the edger. Let the weight of the machine do the work. A lot of the work I'm doing here, I'm actually lifting up a bit on the machine to take some of the weight off the front of the edger. You can really see how close the edger gets to the wall here. This is really important when you're sanding around door jambs and the like. I'm pretty well done in the living room, but one of the more critical parts with the edger is this really visible focal point, the top of the steps as you enter into the hallway here. It's easy to dig deeply into a nosing because sometimes they're cocked just a little bit as you're installing it. You want to be particularly careful with the edger here to get the floor perfectly flat. Since this whole hallway is run the short dimension, I have to use the edger down its entire length. It's the only way I can sand it. It's a lot of extra work, but it's all I can do. Once you've finished roughing the floor, or for that matter, after every paper, you'll want to sweep or vacuum it, as my helper Dave is doing. And I don't care how tight you lay the floor, you're bound to have some cracks or nail holes that need filling. Now we're using a lacquer-based filler here, but thanks to recent innovations in water-based technology, there are a number of really good alternatives that are becoming available on the market. These are available in both pre-mixed, ready-to-use compounds and those that require job site mixing with fine dust, the same as Dave is doing here with a lacquer-based product. Whether you're using a water-based filler or a solvent-based filler, I strongly recommend you wear rubber gloves and a respirator. To stiffen them up to spot fill, you just add a little extra dust. Or you can add solvent or lacquer or water to make them easier to work. Notice Dave's actions here. You don't want to leave any excess filler to dry on the floor. If you do, the wheels of the machines may hit those and tilt, causing it to slant to one side or the other and gouge or dig a hole in the floor. Now you might think troweling the floor is a lot of work, but we find by troweling we save ourselves a lot of time, and we thoroughly fill every floor completely. When you're working around removable objects, try to get them out of there so you don't run any filler down the sides or inside them. Now, it's not absolutely necessary to trowel fill the floor as we're doing here. You can spot fill with a putty knife or spackle knife if you don't have too many holes to fill. The trowel filling really doesn't take all that long. We had about 500 feet to do here, and one guy did it in just about half an hour. Since this filler is lacquer-based, it only takes about an hour or two to dry. It's one of the nice things about it. So within a matter of a few hours, we're ready to start the second paper. We've switched to a Hummel machine, and we're running 60 grit paper on this 220-volt, 5-horsepower machine, and we've got it hooked up to a dryer outlet. It works exactly like the other machine we showed you, except that it works much faster. Like most other professional model machines, the Hummel uses a lever action to raise and lower the paper on and off the floor. This is a distinct advantage over the tilt-type machines in that it allows you to move the drum on and off the floor with just a slight movement of the hand. Now these machines all have vacuums built into them, but just like your home vacuum cleaner, they won't pick up dust if they're full. Keep an eye on them and empty them when they're about half full. Any nail holes or cracks that pop open after your second paper can be filled by spot filling. This can be done with the consistency of putty, something like this. We have this left over from the trowel filling. We've just allowed the filler to dry a bit. Well, we're finally ready for the final paper. Put my new 120 paper on. Get my cover back on. And we're ready to roll. Now that I'm done with the fine sanding, I need to pull my corners, and I use a very sharp scraper to do that. The corners in areas like this where the edger won't reach leave a little ring out here. You need to do this with the grain, if at all possible. If you've got an area that's unreachable with the grain, or if you've got an extra high spot, you may have to 45 it like this. Now you need to hand sand all the areas that you scrape, otherwise it'll look different with the stain or finish that you're using. And since you need to hand sand all those areas that you edge, you might as well hand sand and scrape at the same time. Now this is a real important step, this handwork. This is as close as you're going to get to the floor before you start staining and finishing, so this is your last chance to get out any marks in the floor. Well, we've just got one final cut to do on the floor. And to do that, we'll use a buffer. Now, if you're not familiar with the use of a buffer, be sure and get a lesson on how to use it from your rental company, because it could really get out of hand and bang up the walls. Now, what we use for this final cut is a screen. As you can see, it's real porous. And it's porous for a reason. It allows the real fine dust to filter through and not clog up like normal sandpaper would. The screen mounts on a pad like this, a 3M pad, and goes on the pusher pad, it's this device here, and slips onto the buffer like this. Now the screening will blend all of our sanding marks together and make the floor really smooth. With a fresh screen, it's sometimes important to start in a closet or an area that's not that visible. That's why I started in this corner. Now, like any other sanding machine or machine used for sanding floors, the buffer should be used with the grain, as I'm doing here. Take short, even strokes across the floor, overlapping with each pass. The whole idea of using a buffer is to blend in all the sanding marks in the floor. Screen backs come in different grits, just like sandpaper, from 60 to 220. I'm using a 120 grit here for my final cut. One of the things you listen for when you're buffing is the sound that it makes. It sounds really coarse when you first hit the wood that needs to be buffed, and after you've hit it for a while, then it sounds a lot smoother and you know that it doesn't need to be buffed anymore. Once the dust is settled, you want to vacuum the floor one more time. Only this time you want to pay particular attention to all those areas around the edges. The last thing I want is for that to end up in my finish. Well, I'm just about ready to finish my floor. But before I start finishing, I thought I'd talk to you just a bit about the types of finishing options that are available today. There's a wide variety of products that are on the market, and more all the time. And I'm often asked, Don, what's the best finish to put on my floor? And I really can't answer that. There's really no one best finish. It really depends on a lot of different factors: maintenance, durability, ease of repair, ease of application. What I've done to kind of give you some idea of the different kinds of products is to do a sample of each type of finish that's readily available today, so that you can see the different sheens and looks and appearances of each type of finish. But no matter what type of finish you're using, make sure you use adequate protection. This means using rubber gloves, whether the reusable types like these or the disposable types, adequate eye protection, and a good respirator. Even if you use a water-based finish or a wax, I recommend you use a respirator. This particular respirator here has a replaceable cartridge. Check with your finish supplier to make sure you've got the right cartridge for the finish that you're using. The finish you select will determine the type of applicator that's best to use with it. If you're doing a water-based finish, you'll want to use a short nap applicator like one of these, or a synthetic solid bristle brush. They apply less finish, which is important when you're doing a water-based finish. Clean up theirs with water. If you're doing an oil or a solvent-based finish, you want to use like a lamb's wool applicator or a hollow bristle natural brush. They pick up and apply more finish, which is important when you're applying the heavier bodied oil or solvent finishes. Cleanups with alcohol, paint thinner, or lacquer thinner. You know, when most novices think about floor finishes, they're usually thinking of polyurethane. The store shelves are filled with polyurethanes or oil-modified urethanes. There's lots of different types of urethanes, though, like the moisture cure. It's harder than the polyurethane, but really best left to the professional. Polyurethanes come in a number of different types of glosses. These two polyurethane samples show the wide range of color and sheen you can get with this type of product. I used a high oil content finish on this side. Notice it's yellow and darkened the wood substantially. It's also a high gloss. High gloss means it's more durable, but it shows the traffic and wear patterns a lot more than this satin, less oil content finish here. Cleanup with polyurethane is done with paint thinner. Although waterborne or water-based finishes are not new to the marketplace, recent EPA regulations are forcing more and more of the oil and solvent-based finishes off the market shelves. One of the nice things about water-based finishes is that they're easy to apply, even if they are expensive. Notice the water-based finish doesn't change the color of unstained wood like oil or solvent-based finish does. Although there's very little odor associated with water-based finishes, just like with any other finish, as soon as you've finished applying it, vacate the house. Then as soon as it's dry to the touch, go back in and ventilate and let all the vapors escape. I thought I'd show you what water-based finishes look like. Probably the most caustic ingredient in most water-based finishes are the catalysts or crosslinkers. Take special precautions when handling these. As you can see, water-based finishes have the consistency and appearance of non-fat milk. This is a real advantage when coating your floor. The opaque appearance of water-based products helps you locate runs and heavy areas, giving you a chance to smooth them out to an even layer before they dry and become clear. When applying the second or third coat of finish, or recoating an area like I'm doing with this sample, the advantage of the opacity characteristics of water-based coatings becomes even more obvious. Oil finishes are one of the oldest methods I know of for protecting wood floors. Repetitive coats of tung, teak, or linseed oil form a protective film that can last for years and years. Oil finishes are easily applied and they're easily repaired as needed. Although they're inexpensive, oil finishes do have some drawbacks. They can take weeks or even months to set up. Meanwhile, you've got a sticky surface that'll attract lint, and they require a lot of maintenance. Notice also that they have a fairly flat sheen. By adding a little wax to it, like we have over here, you can add additional protection against spills and traffic, and by hand or with a machine, you can buff it up to a little higher luster. So-called Swedish finishes are my personal favorite. They may be a little pricey, but they provide a durable, easy-to-maintain surface that'll last for years to come. The solvent-based variety comes in a number of different sheens: gloss, semi-gloss, and matte. But they're quite smelly, and they contain formaldehyde, and they're quite difficult to do. So they're best left to a pro. Now, the water-based Swedish finishes don't change the natural color of the wood as much, and they can easily be applied by the novice. But some people think they're a little too shiny. For a lot of people over 50, when they're thinking of a hardwood floor, they're thinking of a waxed finish. Waxes have taken a pretty bad rap over the years, and I really don't think it's justified. Now, it's true that a lot of waxes will yellow, and for some people's taste, they're too hard to maintain. And really, they shouldn't be used in kitchens or bathrooms or entryways or any place where they're likely to get wet. But a waxed floor is surprisingly durable, and it's inexpensive and easy to do. There are a lot of different types of waxes. This first sample is liquid wax over an oil sealer. It's probably the easiest floor wax to apply, but it water spots easily. The next sample I've done is shellac wax. It's an old form of wax finishing. I don't know of any other floor finish that has quite the depth of the patina that you get from shellac wax. The final sample here is a totally natural floor finish. It's the only floor finish I know of that's totally harmless. It's 3 coats of food-grade paraffin without a sealer. It provides a fairly durable floor finish, but best of all, it's totally harmless to all your household critters. Waxes can be applied and buffed out with either a rag or an electric buffing machine. I'm not a big proponent of staining wood floors. I've gone on record as saying if you want a floor to look a particular color, I recommend you get a wood that looks like that color. But for those that want to put a stain on their floor, I'll talk a little bit about the stains. Floor stains are either dyes or pigments or a combination of dyes and pigments. The more pigment there is in the stain, the more it opaques the grain. The more dye in the stain, the more it highlights the spring growth over the summer growth. No matter what kind of stain you use, however, make sure it's thoroughly dry before you apply that first coat of finish. I thought I'd show you what a stain looks like going onto raw wood, the basic staining process. First, you apply the stain in a circular motion onto the wood, letting it set for a minute or so, and then with a clean rag, go back over it and wipe it with the grain. Stain not only colors the wood, but also seals the grain, which was very important with old types of finishes, or if you're going to be putting a wax over the top of it. We're going to be applying the resin-based Swedish, and it'll match our existing flooring. One of the nicest parts about the whole process is when that first coat of finish goes down. See how that wood grain comes through, just dynamite. A bare wood floor like what we're coating here will drink up a lot more finish than one that's been stained or has been first coated. When you're painting the floor, you always want to keep a nice wet line. Overlap each line 3 to 4 inches if you can. Now here at the grill, I'm using a very dry brush so things don't get glued together. Later on, I'll probably take the grill out for the final coats. We always want to have a plan of attack, particularly if there's 2 people working on the floor at the same time. Whenever you can, you want to try to work away from a light source. It's difficult enough to put on a clear coat of finish, even with plenty of light. Unlike painting a wall or a ceiling, you have one shot at painting a floor. You notice we're taking short, even strokes without flipping the end of the brush. If you do flip the brush, little globs of finish will roll out like ball bearings to end up as raised spots in the finish, out of arm's length where you can't touch them up. You want to keep an eagle eye out for stuff in the finish. Pick it out whenever you can find it. Now we'll do these corners here, and then we'll work towards the middle and then out down the middle of the hallway. When we've got a doorway in the middle of the hallway like we have here, I'll work at one end and my partner will work at the other, and then we'll work out towards the center. When I finish up here along the nosing piece, I want to use a real dry brush so that I don't get any drips or runs along the leading edge of my bullnose.
Okay, last little bit, and I'm out of here.
Once that first coat is dried, you want to prowl the floor looking for blemishes. Take those out before you put that second or third coat down. Here I've got a spot on the floor where somebody's dropped a can or something. Pretty nasty gouge. I'm taking it out with a scraper, and then I'm hand sanding, and I'm blending out wider with my hand sanding than I did with a scraper, so everything blends in well. Out here in the living room, I've got a few more blemishes in the finish I want to take out before I put my next coat on.
Yeah, here in between coats of finish, I like to use color putty. Fill in anything that's popped up here in between coats of finish. It works great.
Color putty is oil-based, so if you're using a water-based finish, be sure you remove all traces of excess putty before applying your next coat.
This color putty comes in a variety of different colors. I usually carry 2 or 3 colors around with me all the time on my fingers like this. And I can mix these colors to get even a greater assortment.
Whether you're using a water-based finish or a resin-based finish, the next step is to screen the floor. I like to use a 150 grit screen for this.
It doesn't take much. You just want to take the tops off. We've raised the grain from the first coat of finish, and we just want to take it down, the tops off. We don't want to sand through the finish.
Now the areas you can't reach with a buffer, you'll have to hand sand with 100 grit paper. And once you finish buffing, vacuum up and you're ready for the next coat. Well, we put a second coat on and buffed it out and vacuumed it up. We're ready now for a final coat. The final coat is tricky, so you want to take extra time in doing it. Most pros will take twice or even 3 times as long doing their final coat as they did their first or second coat.
More to your right. Looking down.
Oh, I see it.
Where you find it necessary to paint against the grain just to get enough finish on the floor, always remember to finish up by painting with the grain to pull it out straight, so you don't have any brush marks on the floor. Well, I'm finally done. And I've already got my most important piece of furniture moved in. But you should probably wait 2 or 3 days before you move all of your furniture in. The finish is a little soft when it's new. I know we made this look fairly simple, and we only took a couple days to do this. But I'd allow a week or longer if I were you when you're doing this type of process. It's better to take a little extra time, have a little patience. There's really not too much you can do to your floor that you can't take out during the process. Even after the process, for that matter, with a little scraping and hand sanding, a little other touch-up with finish. Well, it's about all the time we have for now. If you're still hungry for more details, check out the book or talk to your hardwood flooring dealer. Bye for now.